Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kiev, about Ukraine, because very interesting article was published yesterday by pro-Ukraine resources. According to information we have, apparently the deep state team is once again under strong pressure from the Ukrainian authorities. The last map update was on the evening of September 7th, and the channel avatar was again changed to pixels. I would like to remind you that this is not the first time when the pro-Ukraine resource was under the pressure. And most likely this time the channel is again under attack of the general staff of the armed forces of Ukraine, more precisely under the pressure of Alexander Sirsky. Now we know that the situation on the ground is very difficult. We believe that Deep State has a lot of insights regarding the situation on the ground, let's say in the area of the city of Kupiansk, in the Siversk, in the Kostiantynivka, Pokrovsk directions, and we understand that most likely the maps that you can see right now when talking about any mapper in the world most likely doesn't have anything common with the reality. We believe that the situation is much worse for Ukrainian side. We believe that there are much more territories under control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. So that is why we believe that Deep State wanted to show us the real situation on the ground, but most likely they were not allowed to do this. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously the situation is very interesting. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction. During the previous 24 and 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. The group of forces East continued their offensive operation. The Russians are attacking in this area with the use of 36th, 29th and 5th armies, and they're moving from the river of Mokly Yali in the direction of the road R85 between the cities of Pokrovsk and Gulyapole. And according to information we have, by the morning of the 11th of September of 2025, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Sosnovka. So this update first was added by neutral mappers. But we believe that today, during the 11th of September of 2025, this information will be also confirmed by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, and most likely the group of forces East would also publish additional video. So this is the situation. The Russians are moving further. Furthermore, during the morning of the 11th of September of 2025, several pro-Russian resources published this video. Here we can see a building in the southeastern part of the village of Nikolaevka, and here we can see a Russian soldier with the Russian flag. So based on this video, we came to conclusion that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to take under control at least a part of the village by the name of Nikolaevka, and the Russians continue offensive operation further in the western direction. So the video with the Russian flag was geolocated exactly in this point. Based on this video, we adjusted the map by adding this part of the village of Nikolaevka under complete Russian control. So the Russians are shortening the distance to the road R85, and currently the distance between edge positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation and the road R85 between the cities of Gulyapole and Pokrovsk is already 22 kilometers, which is already enough to use drones to attack vehicles logistic along these roads of supply. As of now, we still haven't received anything about this. Most likely the Russians will try to get a bit closer for another 5 or 10 kilometers, and then they will try to cut this road with drones. And then we're gonna see the beginning of collapse of the entire Orekhov-Gulyapole direction. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received lots of updates, just some changes on the ground that were provided by neutral mappers. But if you remember, just yesterday we were talking about this. Currently, the Ukrainians are counterattacking Russian positions, trying to cut the area of breakthrough in the area of the settlement of Novotoretsk. The Ukrainians are counterattacking in this direction from the northeast, from the village of Vladimirovka, and from the west, from the settlement settlements of Belitska. As of now, different mappers reported that as a result of this counter-offensive operation, indeed the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions and to tighten the news around Russian positions in the area of Novotoretsk, Boykovka and Mayak. Furthermore, lots of territories from this area were colored as a gray zone or contested area by neutral mappers, which means that the Ukrainians continue their offensive operation. At the same time, the Ukrainians improved their positions not just at the base of the Russian breakthrough. The Ukrainians continue their pressure in the northwestern and in the northern parts of the area of breakthrough. But I would like to remind you that almost a month ago, the Russians launched their breakthrough operation with the use of hundreds of sabotage and reconnaissance groups, and somewhere months ago, 25 days ago, the Ukrainians began their counter-offensive operation just with one purpose: to restore control over this territory. 25 days have already passed, and we see that Ukrainians haven't get even probably more or less good results. They're standing at the same line, and if they're moving very slowly, and the Ukrainians are paying for this huge price. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of Kostiantynivka. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded in this area. The Russians managed to establish almost complete control over the pocket to the southeast of the settlement of Kostiantynivka. We're talking about this area. For example, this is the situation already by the morning of the 11th of September of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 10th of September. So we came to this conclusion based on the video that was published by Ukrainian resources. Here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians with FPV drones among these trenches and strongholds. As you can see, one of the attacks took place exactly along this tree line. Another attack took place a bit further in the eastern direction in the vicinity of this trench. So as you can see, this video confirms that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly and to capture this dense network of the fortifications. But at the same time, pro-Russian resources published this video where we can see how Russians were attacking Ukrainian vehicles, so Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicles that most likely were evacuating Ukrainian soldiers from this pocket between the settlement of Pritiechino and Siversk Donetsk-Donbass Canal. So currently we have some doubts whether the Russians control this forest. We believe that there are still Ukrainian positions, but once again, based on this video where we could see how Russians were attacking Ukrainian vehicles that were evacuating Ukrainian soldiers, we believe that the Ukrainians are about to finish the evacuation, because at the same time we got video how Ukrainians were attacking Russians along these trenches, how Russians were digging in deeper, how Russians were controlling their positions, which means that the Russians were not running away from this area. So based on these two videos and these three episodes, we believe that the pocket is about to be taken by the Russians and the Ukrainians are about to abandon their positions completely towards the city of Kostiantynivka. Of course, if they still have this possibility. Furthermore, we see that the Ukrainians still control or still have their positions to the south of the Kupiansk water reservoir in the area of the village of Kupiansk, and most likely along this forest. During the previous 24 hours and during the previous night, this video was published by the Russian sources. Very interesting video, and here we can see how Ukrainians were trying to bring additional supply to the southern bank of the Kupiansk water reservoir with the purpose to support Ukrainian soldiers on the southern bank of this lake. But the Russians discovered that this small boat, this is not even a boat, this is a wooden construction, and the Russians attacked this wooden construction or something like this with FPV drone, and most likely this this batch of support, this piece of support was destroyed by the Russians. So this video confirms that there are still Ukrainians to the south of the lake of the Kupiansk water reservoir, and that the Russians haven't finished the battle for this territory. But at the same time, we see that now the Russians are not tasked to finish the battle for this territory completely. Now the Russians are tasked to finish the battle for the pockets between these villages of Pritiechino and Alexandra Shultina. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Siversk direction. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were published by different mappers. This is the situation by the end of the 10th of September of 2025. This is the situation by the beginning of the 11th of September. As you can see, according to offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the territories to the northeast of the city of Siversk. So these fields were taken by the Russians. At the same time, pro-Ukrainian resources and neutral mappers reported that Ukrainians carry out several counterattacks in the area of Serebryanka. Most likely, the Ukrainians are trying to counterattack in this area with the purpose to unblock Ukrainians who were blocked, who were caught into pincers by Russians on the Ukrainian side of the river of Siversk, Donetsk, Donbass. So the Ukrainians are just trying to maintain the corridor for successful evacuation of those Ukrainians who stuck to the north of the river of Siversk, Donetsk. But furthermore, we got report also published by neutral mappers that indeed during the previous days the Russians attacked these facilities to the north of the city of Siversk. So the report is saying that during the last 12 days, Ukraine armed forces secured some positions west of Serebryanka. We discussed this, continued trying to enter in the central part of the locality. On the other hand, the Russian army intensified the operations at the lakes area, taking control over a series of positions, advancing further west, reaching Siversk Dolomitne mine, which is currently contested. So if you remember, both the general staff of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, Deep State, and now neutral mappers are showing this area as a contested one. So which means that there are very heavy clashes for this area. If Ukrainians lose control over this locality, then they would be forced to fall back from the entire northern, let's say, flank of the Siversk direction. As for the Lyman direction, during the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded on the territory of the settlement of Zaporizhzhia. So, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 10th of September, and this is the situation by the end of the 11th of September. The Russians took under complete control the northern part and some streets and some houses and buildings in the central part. We believe that in coming days, maybe 2 or 3 days, the Russians will secure this village completely, and the Russians will begin regrouping before further offensive operation in the direction of the city of Lyman. Furthermore, several resources reported that the Russians also improved their positions in the southern part of the village by the name of Shandrigolova. This is the situation by the end of the 10th of September, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 11th of September. The Ukrainians consolidate their positions just in the central and in the western parts, but I would like to remind you that just yesterday we got report that the Russians managed to outflank the settlement of Shandrigolova from behind, from its back, from the west, and currently the Ukrainians most likely are encircled without any chances for evacuation. Probably they had opportunity to evacuate during the previous night, but we haven't received anything that can confirm that Ukrainians used their last chance. So most likely in coming days the village of Shandrigolova would be probably secured by the Russians as well. As for the city of Kupiansk, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the main logistic roads for the armored forces of Ukraine in the area of the city of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy along the river Oskol. The Russians control the situation, but without changes on the ground. Also, we expect that in coming days, the front line in the Kupiansk direction will begin moving and will begin being changed in Russian favor. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.